Life as a light fury. A day in the life as a light fury who is protective of Toothless. And it starts here. And then you wake up. And then you watch the How to Train Your Dragons. And then you see Luna. And then you have to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then you are going to the bathroom. And then you wake up Toothless. And then you watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then you realize Toothless has all his teeth. You are a light fury. So I brushed my hair. And then I'm going to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then I'm going to protect Toothless. And I didn't close the door. And I was worried. So I checked. I am a light fury, so I was nervous, so I put my hands on my chest as if I was riding a water slide. And to my surprise, I read the book and I realized I was a light fury. I looked at my picture in the mirror, and then as I looked at my picture in the mirror, I saw Toothless, and I was protective of Toothless. And then we get to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then I was staring at the mirror. And then Toothless is wearing a lanyard. And it had Toothless on it. And then I was going to Rough Runner's house. And I saw Rough Runner and Dart playing Sands. And then I was too shy, so I didn't play Sands. And I was running to hide under a table, and I saw a Toothless picture. And then I hid under the table with Toothless, and when it was safe to come out of hiding, I wanted to eat an apple, but I had to know how much people could it take to eat an apple. And then I was a light fury, so I always had to know that. So I looked it up. How many people does it take to eat apples? And then it said 52 people. And then 52 people is too much, I think to myself. So then as I thought to myself, I put the apple in the fridge. I put the apple in the fridge. And then Dart was going to give us chocolate milk. And then I didn't want ice cream in my chocolate milk. And then while Dart got the barbecue sauce, I just had tomatoes, mushrooms, onions, and cucumbers. So I had to pick at the cucumbers, because light furies do that. And then, as a light fury, Rough Runner eats his cucumbers whole, but I don't. And then I'm trying to eat my cucumbers, and then I ate in a circular pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then the circular pattern is done. And then I picked at the tomato. And then Rough Runner is eating his onions, but only me, I get to pick at my tomato. And then Rough Runner's eating his barbecue sauce. And then I was ready to leave at midnight, so I did a midnight roar to Rough Runner before I left. Toothless came to Rough Runner's house, too. He didn't play Sands because he was hiding with Luna. And then Luna left. I left. And then when I looked out, there was a cityscape outside Rough Runner's house. It was midnight. And then I let out a midnight screech. And then I left. And then I walked that way. we had to get there quick because Toothless was going to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then I was walking away. And then I was going to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then it is walking to the dragon house is a walk in the park. And then we are going to the dragon house. And then I am walking towards the dragon house and the gas station and 7-Eleven. It was memories. And then I am walking towards the dragon house. There's the dragon house! And then I walk towards the door of the dragon house. And then I went in. And then you have to have your shin on the door. That's how you hold a door in Light Fury. And then I walked up and I wanted to watch How to Train Your Dragon, but I didn't want my dragon cycle to stop. So I checked the test again, put my hands on my chest, and I felt nervous, because what if it's not a Light Fury this time? So I took the test again to see which is your dragon. And then, just as I thought, Light Fury again. And then I was a Light Fury. And then I protected Toothless. When the door handle touched Toothless, I was protective of Toothless. And I said, don't touch my Toothless. And don't hurt him. And then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon on the television the next morning. Toothless was sitting next to me. And then we were watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then I was sitting in the chair and having a tissue. And then I was doing dragon jumps. And then I was wearing a Toothless hoodie. And then you are a Light Fury, and I was a Light Fury, and that's the end of the story. But How to Train Your Dragon is the best. How we promotion practice is we have to shed dragon tears. And we have to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then we have to call Stitch and Luna and Toothless. And then we have to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then we have to... Oh no! But the slide was the best in How to Train Your Dragon. And then when we went on the slide, we tried to jump and oh no! And then after we slid, that was the best experience, sliding down the slide. And then I saw Stitch. And then oh no. We saw Stitch and Toothless. This is nostalgia. I think I know what this means. It's the diagonal. Not always, because Luna is a Light Fury. Light Fury. Look at the Luna. I think this is the one. Which is this one. And then Luna watching. And then we should do another book of the Light Fury. And then I was reading it. A day in the life on your Luna cycle. The same words appear on the ceiling. And then I woke up. And then I looked at a How to Train Your Dragon book on the desk. I look at the window first. And then I go out to the bathroom. I don't know there will be nether liquid. And then I saw it. I didn't screech, but I was going to tell Hedwig. And then I saw ukulele. I wanted to play with it because I'm on my Luna cycle, but I said no. And then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then Hedwig said, "Good morning, Luna. You've never seemed this happy when waking up." And I was shocked. I always felt like watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then I was in the chair. And then I was walking to the parking lot listening to How to Train Your Dragon music. And then this is about Toothless and Light Fury. And then I was watching the How to Train Your Dragon in my head while listening to that nostalgia. And then little Luna. And then I was in the How to Train Your Dragon. And then Miss Yana was there, and she was showing me how to draw a picture of Toothless. And then I was drawing a picture, and then I threw a book at Miss Yana to get her attention. Toothless. And then I was looking at Toothless, and we were watching the How to Train Your Dragons. And then when the image of Toothless was zooming in, Miss Yana came and said, "Are you on your dragon cycle, Miss Luna?" And then I said, "Yes, Miss Yana." And then she said, "Did you put a paper towel?" And then I said, "Yes." And then she said, "You need to wash your hands and do 5 pumps of soap." So I did go to the bathroom with Miss Yana, and everyone else was with Hedwig. And then I went to the bathroom and I washed my hands. And then we were walking to the How to Train Your Dragons, and then we were going to go to the baseball. And then we were going to the basketball, but I was looking at a drawing I made of Toothless a year ago to get ready for my graduation. And Toothless and I graduated together. And then we were going to play basketball. And then I got it in first try. Congrats! And then the second, congrats! And then the third, congrats! And then the fourth, congrats again! And then Toothless was shocked. He didn't know I would do it 4 times in a row. Then I got home, and Hedwig was here. She said, "You are on your dragon cycle because I saw the nether liquid in the toilet." And then I didn't know what to say. But then Hedwig gave us raindrop cakes. And they were Jello liquid in a balloon, and then it's called a raindrop cake because it is cake that is a raindrop. And then when Hedwig was talking to me, I started to tear up because I was on my dragon cycle. And then I was checking my pants to see if there's nether liquid. And Hedwig says, "You are going to make your raindrop cake taste like nether liquid." And then Hedwig was looking at me shed dragon tears. And then I started touching my pants again. And then Hedwig said, "Now we need to get paper towels tomorrow morning." And then I walked through the dark dragon house. And I went to sleep. And then as I went to sleep, I started to think about Toothless the dragon. Stitch and Toothless. And then How to Train Your Dragon. The Toothless Cup. How to Train Your Dragon. The Toothless sticker. And then we were done. And that's the end of being a Light Fury. And then I was a Light Fury. And then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then we should watch this television. And then what it's like to glitch as a light fury. And then I put my toothless backpack on the table. I started to get everything out. So I put my toothless backpack to the right side after I closed it. And then I got my toothless lanyard and put it to the left side, my wallet of toothless, the phone that Hedwig got for my birthday, the small phone. It's an old phone. And then I put everything in my pocket and my toothless backpack. And then I left. I have to put on my shoes. So I put on my shoes. And then I loosen it up and then tie it. And then I'm done. And then my left shoe. I need to put my sock in and I have to loosen it up. You glitched again! But every time I glitch, my eyes turn red. Like I am a light fury. Because I am a light fury. Then we watched How to Train Your Dragon. I opened the door 2 times. And then, not you, Toothless! And that was nostalgic. So I had to bring out that same Toothless lanyard. And then I closed it 2 times. And it's locked. And then I closed the other door. And then I left out the driveway. And then I have to walk over the cracks because you are a light fury, I think to myself. And then I kept walking. And then I glitched again! I have to walk all the way back. But every time I glitch, I think like a light fury. And those thoughts are, am I going to screech at something and throw a fireball at the other side? But that didn't happen. Because as I was walking, I looked at the flowers and then the road. And then the electricity box. And then I walked over the hole. And then I look right and then I look left. But you're wasting time if you keep doing it again. And then I raised my hand like I did with Miss Yana. And then I kept walking. But I glitched again when I saw someone. And then that person didn't know that my eyes turned red. And then I glitched again. And again. And those temporary glitches are light fury thoughts. Then I looked at the How to Train Your Dragon. And then when someone comes up to me, I keep glitching. I think as a light fury. Should I screech at her or should I watch How to Train Your Dragon? And then I watched How to Train Your Dragon in my head. But the thought of screeching and trying to protect my toothless is still there. And then I left. And then we watched How to Train Your Dragon. And then I had to count the peas. And then 10 peas would be enough for Toothless. And then as I counted the peas, I was walking and then I was watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then I glitched again. And then I think about Toothless. And then I was watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then I don't need a Toothless hoodie, so I remove it. And then I make sure it is organized. And then I glitched again when I was folding the Toothless hoodie because it's not supposed to have gray scales. It's supposed to have pink scales like a light Fury. And then I put the Toothless hoodie at the very front of my backpack and closed it up. And then I was ready. I put it on and not knowing what I was gonna have. Another glitch. So then I walked. And then you come to a stop. You look left and you look right. And then you do the same things again. For how many times? And then you called the How to Train Your Dragon. You rang the How to Train Your Dragon. And then you kept walking. And then as you kept walking, you look and make a picture of Toothless in your head. And then you decide to count the gaps. And 20 gaps, you say to yourself. And then you realize you glitch again! This isn't any other glitch you experienced. You have to screech. And then you screech. And then it goes like, "Arr!" And that was a fierce screech. And then you say to yourself, and then you watch How to Train Your Dragon. And then you think to yourself, I have never experienced a shift like this. And then I look left and right, again and again, and don't realize that I'm wasting time. And then you glitch again, but that was just a thought of blowing a fireball. And then you keep walking, and then you glitch again. You have to try again. And then you glitch again. You keep glitching, and then this time you say, "Row!" and "Row!" And then the screeches were over. You've never experienced a shift like this, you think to yourself. I thought to myself. And then I glitched again. And then it was like, I said. And I really wanted to watch How to Train Your Dragon. But the screech couldn't stop. And then I was walking again. And then I have to walk the line on the pavement, what I did at graduation. And then I was watching the How to Train Your Dragons. And I kept walking. And then I was almost to the How to Train Your Dragons. And then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then I glitched again. But I thought melee sandwiches were about Toothless. And we were watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then we were there. And then I walked past it, thinking that I was going to go somewhere else. And then this is a melee. So I was watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then I touched a rail. And then I said, "Roar! Roar!" And then I got angry. And then another glitch later, I was screeching. And it was a screech. And it was like, "Roar!" And then I was so angry. I was glitching all over the place. And that was the end of being a light Fury. And then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then in the dragon house, I was asleep. And maybe I was watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then it was the morning of graduation. And then Rough Runner woke us up because Toothless and I were sleeping at Rough Runner's before graduation. he said something about How to Train Your Dragon. And then Rough Runner said, "Wake up, Toothless and Luna. You don't want to be late for graduation." And then I know Rough Runner was going to say, "I bet you were dreaming about Toothless." And then he did say that. And then I dreamed of Toothless. And then we decided to leave. And then we went to the mall. It had the restaurant. And it was my birthday. Congratulations! That was a light fury. So I did what any other light fury did. Made a wish to stay a light fury and roared out my candle instead of blowing out a candle. And as I roared out my candle, Rough Runner said, "What happened to my Toothless keychain?" And then I remembered that day where we were playing Sands at Rough Runner's house that night. And then I was shifting as a light fury. So I roared like, and I got angry. So I didn't know what was happening. And as a light fury, I said, I think this toothless keychain with a bell should watch the How to Train Your Dragon. And then I thought this toothless lanyard was a syringe for the purple juice. And then I was scared of that, so I pushed it down the toilet. And then I read the birthday card, and it turned into a menu. That was amazing. And then we were at the restaurant with Rough Runner and Dart. And then we watched How to Train Your Dragon, and we went to the restaurant, and then we were watching How to Train Your Dragon, and I got a present for my birthday, and because of my shift as a light fury, I ripped open the box that had my present in fiercely. I jumped on the box, and then I got angry at the box, and then I ripped it open, and I realized it was a toothless. No, a light fury Build-A-Bear. And then Rough Runner and Dart were saying, "Do you want to play Sands?" But I didn't want to play Sands. And then they said, "Do you want to watch How to Train Your Dragon?" And then I said, "Yes." And then they said, "Do you want to open the rest of your How to Train Your Dragons?" And then I said no, because those How to Train Your Dragons were speaking about the Epic Universe commercial. And that was the end of Your Birthday as a Light Fury, the story. And then there are more episodes of A Light Fury. And then you are going to watch How to Train Your Dragon. The Winter as a Light Fury, a story. And then I liked the story, The Winter as a Light Fury, because the winter was supposed to be where we are scared all of the time as light furies. And then, as a light fury, I was watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then, it was a December that time. And I opened the door to the dragon house, and there I saw, it was Mr. Hedwig. And then he came up towards me, and Mr. Hedwig had a pickaxe. And that was a nightmare because Mr. Hedwig had Toothless, and I was gonna protect Toothless from Mr. Hedwig. And then Toothless comforted me, and as a light fury, my breathing slowed because I was wearing a light fury hoodie, a light fury onesie, and actually, my angry light fury face with my teeth showing stayed until I cuddled Toothless. And then I was washing my hands that morning trying to forget about everything on December. And then while I was trying to brush my teeth, my shin kicked under the desk and I got scared. I looked under the desk and it was just my shin. And then I was writing a story for Miss Yana. And then, as a light fury, I was thinking, I should not watch How to Train Your Dragon this winter because I'm scared of How to Train Your Dragon. And the movie How to Train Your Dragon, and they were watching Stitch going in the dropper! And then it was a lot of fun. Speaking of Stitch, I had a lot of fun. And we were watching How to Train Your Dragon. Burger King has a new How to Train Your Dragon menu coming out, and it's the best How to Train Your Dragon ever. And then, I know Burger King has How to Train Your Dragon, and then we were watching the dragon. And then Toothless was sitting next to me. And while Toothless was sitting next to me, and we were watching the movie How to Train Your Dragon, I think it was How to Train Your Dragon. And then we were watching Stitch, and the movie Stitch was fun. And then I was thinking as a light fury, I want to see a picture of Toothless the Night Fury. And then I was watching How to Train Your Dragon. Luna is a light fury, another dragon. And then Toothless said, "How long have you been working on that story for Miss Yana?" And then I said, 3 days. And then, while Toothless was in the kitchen, he said, "Can you go get the milk?" And I was scared. I didn't want to get the milk because Toothless knows that I'm never going to come back. Then I went. I saw Hedwig. And then I got the milk. And then I said, "Why aren't we watching How to Train Your Dragon? I think Toothless doesn't want me in the dragon house." And then I was thinking, when is the winter gonna be over? I don't want to do How to Train Your Dragons, and I don't want to see Toothless. And then Toothless comes in and said, "You have to go get the milk." And then I had to get the milk. And then we were at the library that day in winter. And then while we were at the library, I need to write Miss Yana that story. And then I want to watch How to Train Your Dragon. And when Toothless said, "Luna! Luna!" And then they said, "We have to go on the field day." And then field day was the best. And then as we were going to field day, Hedwig came up to me. And then I thought to myself as a light fury, it is winter. What is Hedwig doing? Protect Toothless. If you need to, you can run. And then as I was looking at Hedwig, I made the best decision to run. and then I just stayed. And then after the field day, the fast music from the How to Train Your Dragon played. And then as the fast music from How to Train Your Dragon played, and then I sat next to Toothless, and then I was saying, "You are a light fury, you are a light fury," is the television show about How to Train Your Dragon about Toothless. And that's the end of The Winter as a Light Fury. And then the story of waking up in the dark dragon house as a light fury. And then I woke up. It was creepy. And then I didn't want to watch anything but How to Train a Dragon. And then I saw the Stitch, and I was watching How to Train Your Dragon. And then I woke up in the dark dragon house. The only thing I could see was a red dot, which was the alarm clock. I ate my sandwich in the dark dragon house, thinking, is this a lucid dream? And then it was blue outside when I got out of the dark dragon house. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, which was really dark and nostalgic at some point. And it snowed that night. And I had to think, is this a lucid dream? Because this is a little nostalgic. And then I was watching How to Train Your Dragon when passing by the dark dragon house. And then I was locked in the How to Train Your Dragon with Toothless. And I was in the bathroom, and then I was at the library, and it was fun. And then, as a light fury, I love going to the library because we were at the computer, and I was a light fury, and we were talking, and Toothless was there. And when Toothless was there, he was watching the How to Train Your Dragon, and then we were watching the Dragon movie. And then we were sitting at the computers at the library. And as a light fury is the best place. And then we went to the conference room, and I could see snow outside. The conference room had anybody else at the library. And then I went to the bathroom at the library. It reminded me of the auditorium at graduation. And it was a memory. And we are going to watch the How to Train Your Dragon. And then I was holding the sink. And then I was nervous. And then we were watching the How to Train Your Dragon. And then I saw the toilet at the library. But it reminded me of Toothless. And then I went outside the library for the first time. I looked at the store outside the library, and it was a How to Train Your Dragon. And I want to watch How to Train Your Dragon. I saw the store about books. I think it was a How to Train Your Dragon book, and then it was the one where it's about Toothless and Light Fury. And then I was looking at the snow, and then I saw all the books inside. It said something about Toothless. I think it said Light Fury. I was confused. So then I walked away. And then